You know what happens to pretty little things that don't know their place around here? The growly voice cuts through the cigarette smoke and dim lighting of Quinn's tavern like a blade through silk. Dakota Morrison's steel gray eyes scan the nearly empty bar, lingering on the woman behind the counter, who hasn't even looked up from the glass she's polishing. They learn real quick or they disappear. The crystal tumbler in Serena Vance's hands catches the amber light from the overhead fixtures, refracting tiny rainbows across her knuckles. Her movements remain steady, methodical, but something shifts in the pressure of her grip. The glass edge presses against her palm with enough force to leave temporary indentations in her skin. Outside, the rumble of 5 Harley-Davidson engines grows louder, their synchronized growling like mechanical predators announcing their arrival to the quiet Friday evening crowd. Quinn's Tavern sits on the edge of Millbrook, a place where conversations happen in whispers, and strangers either become regulars or never return. The weathered wooden floors creak with decades of stories, and the vintage beer signs flicker with the inconsistent rhythm of old neon. Tonight, only 3 customers occupy the worn leather bar stools, nursing their drinks and minding their own business until the sound of approaching motorcycles makes them exchange nervous glances. Serena sets down the polished glass with deliberate care, her fingers lingering on the rim for just a moment longer than necessary. To any casual observer, she appears completely ordinary. Average height, understated beauty, wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans that suggest nothing more threatening than someone trying to make an honest living. But there are details that don't quite fit the picture of a small-town bartender. The way her eyes sweep the room every 30 seconds, cataloging exits and potential threats, how she positions herself with clear sight lines to both the front door and the back office. The small surgical scar barely visible on her neck where her hair has shifted slightly. The motorcycle engines cut off simultaneously outside, leaving an ominous silence that seems to press against the windows. Serena's hand instinctively moves toward her collarbone, touching something beneath her shirt. Dog tags rest against her skin, warm from body heat and worn smooth from years of unconscious contact. The metal carries engravings that tell a story she's spent the last 2 years trying to forget. Sergeant Serena Vance, Combat Medic, Afghanistan Deployment. Sleep doesn't come easily these days. When it does, it brings memories of desert sand and helicopter rotors of voices calling for help that she couldn't provide fast enough. 3 months ago, she jolted awake from another nightmare, sweat-soaked sheets clinging to her trembling body as phantom screams echoed in her ears. That morning, she made a decision. No more running from city to city. No more temporary jobs. Quinn's Tavern represented something she hadn't had since returning from overseas. Stability. The front door swings open with enough force to rattle the frame, and 5 figures fill the entrance like a storm front moving inland. Dakota Morrison leads the procession, his presence commanding immediate attention. Tattoos snake up both arms, telling stories of violence and rebellion in intricate black ink. Behind him, his crew arranges themselves with practiced intimidation. Each man represents a different flavor of menace, from the wiry speed of youth to the calculated brutality of experience. "Evening, folks," Dakota announces to the room, though his attention remains fixed on Serena. His voice carries the artificial friendliness of someone accustomed to getting his way through implied threat rather than open confrontation. "Hope everyone's having a peaceful night." The 3 existing customers develop sudden interest in the bottoms of their drinks. One slides a 20 across the bar towards Serena and heads for the exit without making eye contact with the newcomers. The remaining 2 shift uncomfortably on their stools, caught between the desire to leave and the fear of drawing attention to themselves through movement. If stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges resonate with you, show your support with a like and subscribe. Your engagement helps bring these untold narratives to light. And we're grateful for every person who chooses to be part of this community. Serena straightens behind the bar, professional masks sliding into place with practiced ease. "Welcome to Quinn's. What can I get you, gentlemen?" Her voice carries the neutral politeness of customer service, but her stance betrays subtle preparation. Weight balanced on the balls of her feet, hands positioned for quick movement, shoulders squared but not aggressive. Dakota approaches the bar with deliberate slowness, each step designed to build tension. His boots, heavy with steel toes and road dust, create rhythmic impacts against the wooden floor. 5 whissies, he says, settling onto a bar stool that groans under his weight. The good stuff, not the watered-down swill you probably serve the tourists. The implication hangs in the air like smoke. This isn't just an order for drinks. It's a test of compliance, a way of establishing dominance in a space that doesn't belong to him. Serena reaches for the top-shelf bourbon without hesitation. Her movements efficient and professional. As she pours, Dakota studies her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "You're new," he observes, though it sounds more like an accusation than a conversation starter. "Old Quinn never hired pretty faces. Said they were too much trouble." His laugh carries no humor, only sharp edges that seem to cut through the ambient noise of the jukebox playing softly in the corner. Serena slides the first glass across the polished bar surface, the amber liquid catching the light like liquid gold. "Quinn's been good to me," she replies, maintaining eye contact just long enough to show she's not intimidated, but not so long as to appear challenging. It's a delicate balance, one she's learned through necessity rather than choice. The other 4 bikers spread out around the bar area, not quite surrounding her, but creating an unmistakable sense of enclosure. Each man carries himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to intimidation tactics working in his favor. Their leather jackets bear the insignia of the Blackwater Riders, a local motorcycle club with a reputation that extends far beyond recreational riding. Dakota accepts his whiskey but doesn't drink immediately. Instead, he rotates the glass slowly, watching the liquid swirl, as if reading fortune in its movement. "Quinn understood how business works in this town," he continues, his tone conversational but loaded with implication. "Smart man knew when to show proper respect to the people who keep places like this running smooth." The temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees despite the warmth of the evening. Serena pours the remaining drinks, hyper-aware of every movement, every position change from the men around her. Military training whispers warnings in the back of her mind. Evaluate threats, identify escape routes, assess available weapons. The mental checklist runs automatically, muscle memory from a time when situational awareness meant the difference between life and death. "I'm sure Quinn was a wise businessman," Serena responds carefully, setting the last glass on the bar. "Anything else I can get you?" Dakota's smile reveals teeth that have seen their share of violence. "Oh, I think there might be plenty you can do for us." He gestates around the nearly empty establishment, his meaning unmistakable. "See, Quinn's Tavern operates under certain arrangements, protection agreements that ensure everyone stays safe and happy." The word protection hangs in the air like a loaded weapon. Serena's fingers unconsciously touch her dog tags through the fabric of her shirt, a gesture so subtle that most people would miss it entirely. But Dakota notices everything, filing away each micro-expression and nervous habit for future use. "Protection from what?" Serena asks, though she already knows the answer. Small towns across America harbor their own versions of Dakota Morrison, men who figured out how to extract tribute from legitimate businesses through carefully orchestrated intimidation. The question seems to amuse Dakota. He takes his first sip of whiskey, savoring both the alcohol and the moment. "Well, now that depends entirely on how cooperative people choose to be. Quinn paid us $200 a month, and in return, nobody bothered his establishment. No broken windows, no fights that got out of hand, no accidents that might hurt business." Around the bar, his crew nods in agreement, their body language radiating menace despite their outwardly relaxed postures. They've performed this routine countless times, refining their approach until it achieves maximum psychological impact with minimum legal exposure. The beauty of their system lies in its plausible deniability. Technically, they're not making threats. They're simply offering services. Serena processes this information with the analytical mind of someone trained to assess tactical situations. 5 armed men familiar with the territory operating with apparent immunity from local law enforcement. The smart play would be compliance, at least temporarily, while she figures out how to extract herself from the situation. But something in Dakota's tone, in the casual way he assumes ownership over her choices, triggers a different response entirely. "That's quite a business model," she says, her voice level, despite the tension coiling in her chest like a spring under pressure. "What exactly do these protection services include?" Dakota's expression shifts slightly, recognizing something in her tone that doesn't quite match the submissive response he's accustomed to receiving. Most people, when faced with the prospect of extortion, react with fear or anger. Serena's clinical curiosity represents something outside his normal experience, and uncertainty makes him more dangerous rather than less. "Whatever needs protecting," he answers, his voice dropping to a more ominous register. "Property, inventory, personal safety. Amazing how many accidents can happen to people who don't understand how things work around here." The 2 remaining customers suddenly develop urgent business elsewhere, abandoning their drinks and heading for the exit with barely concealed haste. Their departure leaves Serena alone with 5 men who've made their intentions clear. The isolation amplifies every sound. The hum of the refrigeration units, the distant tick of an analog clock, the soft scrape of leather against bar stools as the bikers shift position. Serena glances toward the phone mounted on the wall behind the bar, calculating distances and response times. Even if she could call 911, how long would it take for help to arrive? And what would these men do while they waited? Her military training suggests that the best defense involves controlling the pace of engagement, but civilian life has complicated those instincts with legal and social constraints that didn't exist in combat zones. I appreciate the information, she says, buying time while her mind works through available options. Let me talk to the owner about these arrangements. Dakota's laugh carries genuine amusement now, the sound harsh and grating in the intimate space of the bar. Sweetheart, you're looking at the new management. Quinn sold this place last week to a holding company that, funny thing, contracts all their security through us. That makes you our employee now. Whether you like it or not, the revelation hits like cold water, washing away any remaining illusions about the nature of this encounter. This isn't random harassment or petty extortion. It's a calculated takeover, probably planned for months while they waited for the right opportunity. Quinn's retirement wasn't coincidental. It was orchestrated by people who understand exactly how to eliminate obstacles to their expansion. Serena's hand moves unconsciously toward her necklace. Again, fingers finding the familiar shape of military identification tags through the thin fabric of her shirt. The metal is warm against her skin, a tangible connection to a version of herself that knew how to handle predators like Dakota Morrison. But that version existed in a world with different rules, where Bwayne was an accepted tool of problem-solving, rather than a last resort with devastating legal consequences. A Polaroid photograph slips from her wallet as she reaches for a towel, fluttering to the floor behind the bar where only she can see it. The image shows 5 people in desert camouflage. Their faces young and confident, arms linked in camaraderie against a backdrop of military vehicles. 3 of those faces belong to people who never made it home, their stories ending in explosions of sand and metal and screaming that still echoes in her dreams. Dakota notices the photograph and leans forward trying to get a better look. What's that you got there, soldier girl? His tone carries a new element of mockery, as if he's discovered a weakness he can exploit. Playing dress up, or is that some kind of costume party picture? The casual dismissal of her service triggers something deeper than anger. Something that predates her careful civilian persona and reaches back to desert nights when staying alert meant staying alive. Serena retrieves the photograph with movements that appear casual, but carry the precise economy of motion that comes from military conditioning. Just old friends, she says, though her voice has developed an edge that wasn't there moments before. She tucks the picture away, but not before Dakota glimpses enough detail to understand exactly what he's looking at. Military friends, he observes with predatory satisfaction. That explains a few things. The way you stand, how you watch the room. But here's the thing about soldiers, especially female soldiers. He pauses for effect, savoring the moment. They're trained to follow orders, and right now, your orders are coming from me. The statement hangs in the air like a challenge, daring Serena to contradict him while simultaneously establishing his perceived authority over her circumstances. Around the bar, his crew shifts position subtly, creating a more obvious pattern of enclosure. What began as casual intimidation is evolving into something more direct and immediate. Serena feels the familiar weight of decision pressing against her consciousness. The same calculations that once determined life and death in foreign territory now apply to a small-town bar where the stakes feel simultaneously smaller and more personal. The woman she's tried to become over the past 2 years. The quiet civilian seeking peace and anonymity. Wars against the soldier who never really left active duty, who merely went underground while learning to hide behind customer service smiles and mundane routines. What would you do in Serena's position when faced with predators who mistake kindness for weakness? How far should someone go to protect themselves? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Dakota drains his whiskey and sets the empty glass down with deliberate force. The sound sharp and final in the enclosed space. Here's how this works, he continues, his voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to delivering ultimatums. You pay us $400 a month, double what Quinn used to contribute since we're taking on additional responsibilities. Consider it hazard pay for dealing with management changes. The escalation isn't surprising, but the specific targeting feels personal rather than purely business. Serena recognizes the pattern from other situations where her military background became a liability rather than an asset. Some people view veterans, especially female veterans, as either broken toys or potential threats that need to be controlled. Dakota represents a particularly dangerous combination of both perspectives. 400 seems steep for a place this size. Serena observes her training demanding that she gather intelligence even while under pressure. What exactly are these additional responsibilities you mentioned? The question seems to delight Dakota as if she's finally playing the game according to his rules. He gestures around the bar with proprietary confidence, his movement encompassing everything from the vintage fixtures to the woman standing behind the polished wood surface. Well, for starters, we'll be keeping a much closer eye on operations here, he explains, his smile revealing teeth that have seen violence. Making sure the new management understands local customs and shows proper appreciation for community support. Then there's inventory management, customer relations, personnel oversight. Each item on his list represents another level of control, another way of inserting his organization into every aspect of the business. The methodology is sophisticated in its simplicity. Incremental assumption of authority until resistance becomes practically impossible. By the time most people realize they've lost control of their own establishments, the dependency relationship has become too complex to unravel. Serena nods as if considering his proposal while her peripheral vision tracks the positions and movements of his crew. Two men have moved closer to the bar, ostensibly examining the collection of vintage beer bottles, but actually reducing her available space for maneuvering. A third has positioned himself near the front door, not quite blocking the exit, but making his presence known. The remaining two maintain their seats, but shift their weight in ways that suggest readiness for rapid movement. The tactical situation deteriorates with each passing moment, but Serena's military conditioning provides a strange sort of calm in the face of mounting pressure. Stress inoculation training teaches soldiers to function effectively even when circumstances become overwhelming. And those lessons apply whether the threat comes from enemy combatants or domestic predators. Personnel oversight, she repeats, focusing on the item that seems most immediately threatening. What does that involve exactly? Dakota's expression shifts from predatory amusement to something darker and more direct. Making sure staff members understand their positions in the local hierarchy. Some people, especially newcomers, have trouble adjusting to how things work around here. They need extra guidance to help them find their proper place. The euphemisms can't disguise the underlying threat. Serena has encountered enough bullies in military and civilian contexts to recognize the pattern. Psychological intimidation escalating toward physical coercion, all wrapped in language designed to provide legal cover while maximizing emotional impact. One of the bikers, a lean man with prison tattoos covering his forearms, approaches the bar and leans across the polished surface. His proximity violates her personal space deliberately, an invasion designed to trigger fight-or-flight responses that will compromise her decision-making capacity. "Boss is being real patient with you," he observes, his breath carrying the smell of tobacco and poor dental hygiene. Most people figure out the score a lot faster than this. Serena maintains her position despite every instinct screaming at her to create distance. Military training emphasizes the importance of controlling initial responses to provocation, of maintaining tactical flexibility until the optimal moment for action presents itself. But that training assumes she can respond with appropriate force when the situation demands it. An assumption that becomes complicated in civilian contexts, where violence carries legal and social consequences that extend far beyond immediate survival. Dakota watches this exchange with obvious satisfaction, studying Serena's micro-expressions for signs of the fear or submission he expects to see. When neither appears, his demeanor shifts subtly from confident control towards something more dangerous. Predators become most volatile when their established patterns fail to produce expected results. "Maybe you didn't hear me clearly," he says, rising from his bar stool with deliberate menace. His height and bulk, designed to intimidate through physical presence, cast a shadow across the bar surface. "This isn't a negotiation. This is me explaining how things work so you don't make any unfortunate mistakes." The psychological pressure continues mounting, but Serena feels something unexpected beginning to stir beneath her carefully maintained civilian composure. The polite bartender persona that she's cultivated for 2 years starts developing cracks, revealing glimpses of the soldier who learned to function in environments where hesitation meant death. Her hand moves toward her necklace again, fingers tracing the outline of dog tags that represent more than military identification. They connect her to people who died because she couldn't reach them in time, couldn't provide the medical care that might have saved their lives. The guilt and trauma from those failures drive her towards civilian anonymity, but they also represent a debt that can never be fully repaid. Dakota notices the gesture and decides to exploit what he perceives as a weakness. "Those your dead soldier boys under there?" he asks with casual cruelty. "Must be tough carrying around reminders of all the people you couldn't save." The words hit with surgical precision, targeting exactly the psychological wounds that Serena has spent 2 years trying to heal. PTSD doesn't disappear. It merely hibernates, waiting for the right trigger to reawaken every buried memory and suppressed response. Dakota's casual reference to her fallen comrades functions like a key turning in a lock, opening doors that she's worked desperately to keep sealed. Images flash through her consciousness, helicopter rotors spinning against desert sky, radio voices calling for medical assistance. Her hands covered in blood that belonged to people she'd trained with, laughed with, planned futures with. The memories carry physical sensations along with emotional trauma, phantom pain from wounds that healed years ago but never stopped aching. "You don't know anything about them," Serena says, her voice dropping to a register that carries warning signals for anyone trained to recognize the difference between fear and focused intent. But Dakota misinterprets her response as emotional vulnerability rather than tactical preparation. In his experience, psychological pressure applied to personal trauma produces compliance through shame and helplessness. He's never encountered someone whose trauma includes extensive training in applied violence, someone for whom emotional triggers might produce dangerous rather than submissive responses. "I know they're dead and you're alive," he continues with calculated brutality. "I know you're standing here serving drinks instead of playing soldier, which tells me everything I need to know about your combat record." The taunt represents a fundamental miscalculation, the kind of tactical error that proves fatal in environments where survival depends on accurate threat assessment. Dakota assumes that military trauma creates weakness rather than recognizing it as evidence of survival under extreme conditions. He sees civilian employment as retreat rather than strategic repositioning. Serena's breathing changes subtly, becoming deeper and more controlled as her body begins accessing stress responses that served her well in combat zones. The hypervigilance that made her an effective medic under fire redirects toward the immediate tactical situation, cataloging weapons, distances, and vulnerabilities with mechanical precision. The transformation isn't visible to casual observation, but Serena feels her awareness shifting into the heightened state that once kept her alive when mortars fell around her aid station. Time seems to slow slightly, allowing her to process multiple threat vectors simultaneously while maintaining the appearance of normal civilian behavior. Dakota leans across the bar, bringing his face close enough that she can smell the whiskey on his breath mixed with tobacco and something else. Something that suggests poor hygiene and casual disregard for social boundaries. His proximity represents both intimidation and tactical error, closing distance that he might need if the situation escalates beyond psychological warfare. "Here's what's gonna happen," he says, his voice dropping to a whisper that carries more menace than shouting ever could. "You're going to accept our terms, show proper gratitude for our protection, and learn to appreciate the stability we provide. Or you're going to discover just how unstable life can become for people who don't understand local customs." The threat is explicit now, stripped of euphemism and delivered with the confidence of someone who's never faced serious resistance. Dakota's crew shifts position around the bar, their movements coordinated and practiced, designed to maximize psychological pressure while maintaining plausible deniability if law enforcement becomes involved. Serena feels the familiar weight of decisions settling over her consciousness. The same calculations that once determined whether to risk exposing herself to enemy fire in order to reach wounded soldiers. The stakes feel different but equally consequential. Submit to extortion and accept victimization, or resist and face consequences that could include serious physical harm. Her fingers find her dog tags through the fabric of her shirt, tracing familiar engravings that connect her to people who died believing in principles worth fighting for. The metal carries warmth from her body heat, and the weight of promises made to comrades who never had the chance to return home and build quiet civilian lives. In the growing silence broken only by the soft hum of refrigeration units and the distant tick of an analog clock, Serena makes her choice. The decision crystallizes in Serena's mind with the clarity that comes from years of split-second choices under pressure. She straightens behind the bar, her posture shifting from defensive to something more defined, though still carefully controlled. "I understand your business model," she says, her voice carrying a new quality that makes Dakota pause mid-gesture, "but I'm not interested in your protection services." The words hang in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Around the bar, the five bikers exchange glances that communicate volumes without speech. They've heard resistance before, but something in Serena's tone suggests this won't follow their usual script of escalating intimidation, leading to inevitable submission. Dakota's expression hardens, the predatory amusement draining from his features like water from a broken glass. You might want to reconsider that position, sweetheart. People who make poor decisions around here tend to regret them real quick. He signals with a subtle gesture, and his crew begins moving with practiced coordination. The lean man with prison tattoos slides around the bar's end, positioning himself to cut off her retreat toward the back office. Another approaches from the opposite side. Shani Chun also, while the remaining two maintain their positions near the front entrance. The movement is subtle but unmistakable. The Zakich designed to create psychological pressure through spatial control. Serena tracks each repositioning with peripheral vision while maintaining eye contact with Dakota. Military training whispers tactical assessments in the back of her mind. 5 hostiles familiar with terrain. Coordinated movement patterns suggesting experience with intimidation scenarios. Her position behind the bar provides some physical barrier, but also limits mobility options. The kitchen door remains accessible, but retreat might escalate the situation. Rather than diffusing it, I think there might be some misunderstanding here, she continues, keeping her voice level despite the mounting pressure. This is a legitimate business serving a peaceful community. I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone without resorting to threats. Dakota laughs, but the sound carries no humor, only sharp edges that seem to cut through the ambient noise of the old building settling around them. Peaceful community. That's rich. He takes a step closer to the bar, his bulk casting shadows across the polished wood surface. You know what keeps communities peaceful? People who understand their place in the natural order. The euphemism drops away entirely now, replaced by naked intimidation that acknowledges exactly what this encounter represents. Serena feels familiar sensations beginning to stir in her chest. Elevated heart rate, heightened awareness, the subtle shift in perception that accompanies preparation for violence. These responses served her well in combat zones, but civilian contexts complicate their application with legal and social constraints that didn't exist when mortar rounds were falling around her aid station. The biker who circled behind the bar reaches for her shoulder. His movement casual but unmistakably aggressive. Boss is trying to be reasonable with you, he says. His fingers making contact with her shirt. Maybe you need some help understanding the conversation. The physical contact triggers an immediate response that Serena barely manages to contain. Military conditioning screams warnings about hostile contact in confined spaces, about the importance of maintaining tactical mobility when surrounded by potential threats. She steps away from his reaching hand, but the movement brings her closer to the second man approaching from the opposite direction. Please don't touch me, she says firmly, but without the aggression that might justify escalation on their part. Self-defense laws require clear documentation of unwanted contact and reasonable attempts at de-escalation before physical response becomes legally justified. Dakota seems pleased by her discomfort, interpreting her controlled withdrawal as evidence of the fear he expects to see. See, now you're starting to understand how this works. Cooperation makes everything easier for everyone involved. He moves around the bar himself now, abandoning the pretense of customer-business owner interaction in favor of direct confrontation. His approach forces Serena to retreat further, but the kitchen door remains several steps away, and his crew continues positioning themselves to limit her available options. The previous arrangement with Quinn was $200 monthly, Dakota continues, his voice dropping to the conversational tone people use when discussing routine business matters. But given the management transition and additional security concerns, we're implementing a new rate structure. $400 seems reasonable for comprehensive protection services. The casual assumption of authority combined with his physical encroachment into her workspace represents a calculated escalation designed to establish dominance through incremental boundary violations. Serena recognizes the pattern from military intelligence briefings about insurgent recruitment tactics. Start with small compromises, gradually increase pressure until resistance becomes psychologically impossible. But recognition doesn't diminish the immediate tactical problem. 3 men now stand within arm's reach, their positioning coordinated to prevent escape while maintaining the appearance of normal conversation. The remaining 2 control the primary exit, and the back office offers limited refuge rather than genuine escape route. I think you should leave now. Serena says, her training demanding clear verbal boundaries before physical defense becomes necessary. This is private property, and you're making me uncomfortable. The statement serves multiple purposes: establishing her desire for them to depart, documenting their trespassing status, and creating legal foundation for self-defense claims should the situation deteriorate further. But Dakota interprets her formal language as weakness rather than preparation. Making you uncomfortable? He laughs again, reaching across the bar to grab a bottle of expensive whiskey without permission. The theft is casual, performed with the confidence of someone who doesn't expect consequences for his actions. Sweetheart, uncomfortable is just the beginning. Wait until you see what happens to people who don't appreciate our generosity. The lean man behind the bar moves closer, his proximity now clearly threatening rather than merely invasive. When Serena attempts to maintain distance, he follows, forcing her backward toward the wall, where her mobility options become even more limited. Nowhere to run back here? He observes with satisfaction. Might as well relax and listen to what the boss is telling you. The combination of spatial compression and verbal threats triggers memories that Serena has spent 2 years trying to suppress. Desert nights when enemy forces surrounded her aid station. The claustrophobic sensation of being trapped in a vehicle under enemy fire, the desperate calculations required to save lives. While her own survival remained uncertain, past and present begin to blur as stress responses designed for combat zones activate in response to civilian threats. Her breathing becomes shallow, heart rate accelerating as adrenaline floods her system. The familiar signs of PTSD activation manifest despite her best efforts to maintain emotional control. Sweating palms, tunnel vision, the persistent sensation that danger lurks just beyond the edge of perception. These responses saved her life repeatedly during deployment, but they feel like betrayal in civilian contexts, where emotional regulation carries more importance than tactical readiness. Dakota notices her distress and decides to exploit what he perceives as psychological vulnerability. "Something wrong with you?" he asks with mock concern. "You look a little pale there, soldier girl. Maybe thinking about some bad memories." The observation strikes with surgical precision, targeting exactly the wounds that Serena has worked hardest to heal. PTSD doesn't respond to logic or willpower. It operates through neurological pathways that bypass conscious control, triggering fight or flight responses that can overwhelm rational decision-making processes. Images flash through her consciousness. Helicopter rotors spinning against desert sky. Radio voices calling for medical assistance. Her hands covered in blood that belonged to people she trained with, laughed with, planned futures with. The sensory memories carry physical components along with emotional trauma, phantom pain from wounds that healed years ago but never stopped aching. "Looks like we hit a nerve," Dakota continues with calculated cruelty. "What happened over there? Lose some friends? Get a little too close to the action?" The questions slice through her defenses like shrapnel through Kevlar, opening psychological wounds that she spent months learning to bandage. Military trauma doesn't simply disappear. It hibernates, waiting for the right combination of triggers to reawaken every suppressed memory and buried response. Serena grips the edge of the bar for support as vertigo threatens her balance. The room seems to shift around her, present reality blending with memories of situations where survival depended on split-second decisions and perfect execution under impossible pressure. Her hands shake slightly, a tremor that betrays the emotional disruption she's trying to conceal. "Please," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just leave me alone." The plea represents surrender in Dakota's experience, confirmation that psychological pressure has achieved its intended effect. He moves closer, his bulk casting shadows across the small space behind the bar where Serena finds herself increasingly trapped. "Too late for that now," he says, reaching toward her neck where the outline of dog tags shows beneath her shirt. "Time for you to learn some respect." His fingers make contact with the chain, gripping the metal links with enough force to press them against her skin. The physical violation triggers something deeper than conscious thought, activating neural pathways that connect directly to survival instincts honed by years of military service. The dog tags represent more than identification. They connect her to people who died believing in principles worth fighting for. When Dakota's grip tightens, attempting to tear the chain from her neck, the action crosses a threshold that transforms victim into defender. Training takes over where conscious thought fails. Serena's hand moves with mechanical precision, grabbing Dakota's wrist and applying leverage that forces him to release his grip on her necklace. The technique is basic self-defense taught to every soldier, regardless of their primary military occupation, but executed with the competence that comes from extensive practice under stress. Dakota stumbles backward, more surprised than injured, but his crew responds immediately to the apparent assault on their leader. The lean man behind the bar lunges forward, attempting to grab Serena's arms and immobilize her for retaliation. Muscle memory guides her response. Step left to avoid his reaching hands. Redirect his momentum with minimal force. Create distance while maintaining defensive positioning. The movements flow together seamlessly. Years of training compressed into seconds of precise application, but there are too many of them, and the confined space works against her defensive strategy. As she evades one attacker, another moves to flank her position. The tactical situation deteriorates rapidly, numerical advantage combining with familiar terrain to overwhelm her individual capabilities. The third biker grabs her left arm, his grip strong enough to leave bruises as he attempts to pin her against the wall. Serena responds with another textbook defensive technique, using his own leverage against him to break the hold while creating space for additional movement. Yet escape remains impossible. Every defensive success brings immediate replacement threats, and her attackers show no indication of backing down despite her clear willingness to defend herself. The situation escalates beyond intimidation toward active assault, forcing decisions that she'd hoped never to face in civilian life. Dakota recovers his balance and approaches with deliberate menace. His earlier pretense of business negotiation abandoned in favor of open aggression. "Big mistake," he growls, pulling something from his jacket pocket that glints in the ambient light. The appearance of a weapon fundamentally alters the tactical calculus. Serena's training recognizes escalation patterns that lead towards serious bodily harm or death. Situations where defensive response becomes not justified but necessary for survival. What happens next unfolds with the terrible efficiency of someone trained to neutralize threats under extreme pressure. Serena moves with purpose rather than panic, applying defensive techniques with precision calibrated to stop attacks without causing unnecessary injury. Her responses target specific pressure points and leverage opportunities, seeking to incapacitate rather than permanently damage. The first attacker finds himself on the floor with a dislocated shoulder, victim of a joint lock that appeared from nowhere and dissolved just as quickly. The second experiences temporary paralysis as nerve compression interrupts the connection between his brain and voluntary muscle control. The third staggers backward with tears streaming from his eyes, the result of precise contact with sensitive facial nerves. Dakota himself receives special attention, his weapon-wielding hand immobilized through application of pressure that forces him to drop whatever he'd intended to use. A follow-up technique leaves him gasping for breath as his diaphragm struggles to resume normal function after careful manipulation of specific anatomical vulnerabilities. The entire sequence lasts less than 90 seconds. Efficient application of defensive techniques designed to neutralize multiple attackers while maintaining legal justification for the level of force employed. Serena stands surrounded by incapacitated men, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The sound of sirens grows audible in the distance, mechanical wailing that announces the arrival of law enforcement. Sheriff Ray Hawkins bursts through the front door with his weapon drawn, taking in the scene with the trained eye of someone experienced in assessing tactical situations. "Everyone on the ground, hands visible," he commands, though his attention focuses primarily on the bikers rather than the woman standing behind the bar. His approach suggests familiarity with both the location and the people involved, knowledge that extends beyond random response to a 911 call. Dakota struggles to regain his breathing while his crew slowly recovers mobility and orientation. Their positions on the floor, combined with the obvious signs of defensive rather than aggressive action, tell a story that Hawkins reads with professional competence. "Sergeant Vance," he says, addressing Serena with a formality that surprises everyone present. "Are you injured?" The use of her military rank reveals a connection that explains his rapid response and immediate assessment of the situation. Serena straightens, recognizing the voice of her former commanding officer, despite the civilian context in law enforcement uniform. "No injuries, sir," she responds automatically. Military protocols taking precedence over civilian social norms. Multiple attackers. Defensive response only. Minimal force applied. Hawkins nods, holstering his weapon as backup officers arrive to secure the scene. "Video surveillance confirms self-defense," he announces, gesturing toward security cameras that Serena hadn't noticed during the confrontation. Clear case of assault and battery on the part of the suspects. The revelation that their actions were recorded transforms the legal dynamics completely. Dakota's crew faces charges for assault, trespassing, and attempted extortion. While Serena's defensive response receives protection under state self-defense statutes, but victory comes with costs that extend beyond immediate physical safety. The encounter has shattered the peaceful anonymity that Serena spent 2 years building, exposing her military background and combat capabilities to a community that might not understand the difference between defensive necessity and aggressive violence. More significantly, the incident has triggered PTSD responses that therapy helped her control but never fully eliminated. Standing among incapacitated attackers, she feels the familiar dissociation that follows violent encounters, the sense of watching herself from outside her own body, as adrenaline slowly metabolizes and emotional numbness replaces hyper-alertness. Sheriff Hawkins approaches with the careful movements of someone who understands trauma responses. "Serena," he says gently, using her first name now that the immediate threat has passed. "You did everything right. Clean defensive action, proportional response, clear legal justification." His reassurance helps ground her in present reality, but the damage has been done. The careful psychological work of civilian reintegration lies in ruins around her, destroyed by circumstances beyond her control and people who mistook healing for weakness. As paramedics arrive to treat the injured bikers, Hawkins guides Serena toward his patrol car for a private conversation. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he says quietly. "The quiet life, the fresh start. But sometimes the world doesn't let us escape who we were." Serena nods, understanding that her time as an anonymous bartender has ended permanently. Local news will cover the story. Questions will be asked, and the peaceful existence she'd built will become impossible to maintain. "What happens now?" she asks, though she already suspects the answer. Hawkins pulls a business card from his shirt pocket bearing federal agency logos. "There's a position available," he explains. "Veteran Advocacy Program, helping design safe spaces for trauma survivors. The work might give you purpose beyond hiding from the past." Around them, Dakota and his crew face transportation to county lockup. Their protection racket exposed. Quinn's Tavern will operate free from extortion for the first time in years. Yet Serena feels no satisfaction in the victory. The path forward remains uncertain, filled with therapy sessions and difficult conversations. But for the first time in 2 years, Serena feels hope that her military experience might serve purposes beyond personal protection. Standing beneath flickering streetlights where her anonymity died, but her purpose might be reborn, Serena finally understands that healing is not about escaping the past, but about choosing how to carry it forward.